Whew. It looks like we are live. Yes, we are. Welcome back, everybody, to Just G Live. This is the first Just G about baseball. This is going to be the first of another series kind of thing going on, just like I did with football. Just because the football season is not started, it's just now. It's going to be coming up, hopefully, in the next coming months. Fingers crossed. We will be taking a look at baseball. Baseball should have already started by now. I'm actually really sad that it's not. Baseball is one of my favorite sports and one of my favorite seasons. It goes from spring all the way until fall. It's really what kind of gets me going and keeps me going through through usually a long hot summer. But for right now, let me just finish getting some things set up for the stream. I've got my notes pulled up right here. And so for this, it's going to be a little bit different, just a touch different than my series on football. Because with football, it's been free agency. The offseason is kind of just now underway. It's just going. So whereas with baseball, the baseball offseason is usually the winter and the early spring. Not necessarily the case this year because it's still technically the offseason. The season hasn't started yet. So what I'm going to be doing is going division by division again. In baseball, each division has 5 teams. There are 3 divisions per league, American League and National League. So we're going to be going through, we're going to be taking a look at last year's results, last year's standings. Then we're going to be taking a look at some of the big moves, some of the offseason moves that each team has made. And then we're going to take a look at what this year's possible opening day lineup would look like. And also including with that, we're also going to look at what's probably going to end up being the 5 starting pitchers and the closer. I'm using this from an article that was put together by MLB.com. It's just really easy that way. It puts everything nicely and concisely. And a lot of these teams have made some considerable improvements. The NL West has been a division that's been dominated by 1 or 2 teams only over the last 10, 15 years. It's realistically only been the Dodgers and the Giants. There have been some periods of success for the Arizona Diamondbacks, but they have been kind of far and few in between, and they've really only been able to be really successful when they've had, a single dominant player. The one I'm kind of thinking of is from the late 90s, early 2000s, and that's Randy Johnson. I mean, he's probably or arguably one of the best pitchers to ever play baseball, but they were second in the division last year. They played well. They played good baseball, and they've made a couple interesting offseason moves. So, first off, like I said, I'm going to be kind of trying to format it something similarly to how I was doing it with football. Of course, it'll be different because we're talking about baseball, but besides the point. So, to start with this one, let's just go through the standings and the win totals from last season for each of these teams. And of course, if you know anything about baseball or paid attention realistically to any of it for the last 3 years, the LA Dodgers have been on fire. They have collected and amassed a ton of talent, especially high quality talent at the MLB level, not just in the lower ranks or in the AAA divisions. So last year was no different. The Dodgers were 50 wins over 500. They went 106 and 56. I mean, winning the division by essentially 20, 30 wins. The Diamondbacks came up second, 85 and 77. Flip that number, you have the Giants record. They went 77 and 85. They were followed up by the Rockies and the Padres. The Rockies 1 win over the Padres at the end of the season for essentially bottom of the division. The Rockies went 71 and 91, and the San Diego Padres went 70 and 92. So, and the thing is with this division is that the Dodgers are dominant almost every year. They're very successful almost every year. But when it comes to the playoffs, they never really seem to put it all together. They always seem to have something holding them back. And last season was no different. They made it far in the playoffs. They obviously did not win it all, losing to the eventual MLB trophy winners, World Series winners, Washington Nationals in the NL. I want to say it was the NLCS. Might have been. Either way, that that was a good couple months ago. But the Dodgers have decided realistically for this to kind of just go out and get better. They have minimal losses and they have a couple huge moves made. So obviously the biggest move made, it was, I talked about this when it happened. This was something insane to me when it happened, like live. And I kind of still don't fully understand it from the case of what Boston was doing. So the obvious big talking point around the Dodgers is how much better do they get? They had 106 wins last year. That's awesome. They had, let me see if I can find the actual, the full standings from last season. If I'm not mistaken, they might have had, they had the second most wins in all of baseball, just one fewer than the Houston Astros. I was going to call them the Asterisks, but don't know how that would really go over. But this is turning into a case of how much better does this Dodgers team get? Because, of course, their pitching. Their pitching has been incredible the last couple years with Clayton Kershaw and now with Walker Buehler. Those guys have been incredible for the last good couple years. And then they go and make a move like they did. So that move in question is they traded for David Price and Mookie Betts from the Boston Red Sox for, I think it was Alex Verdugo, an outfielding prospect, and two other small prospects. So immediately, that's one of the best bats in baseball coming over to the Dodgers that already had no problem scoring runs. Their offense was already one of the best in baseball. You've got Max Muncy at first, Justin Turner at third, Cody Bellinger, one of the best home run hitters in the game right now, in center field. And then, of course, that's not to say Corey Seager's no slouch. AJ Pollock isn't any bad either. So this is a team that really didn't need help putting runs on the board or stopping runs. And then they go and make a move like that. So the thing there is it doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of sense for me in terms of what Boston was doing. Of course, they have a new general manager, a new guy behind the scenes, and he worked for the Tampa Bay Rays. His name is Chaim Bloom. We'll get into that a little bit more when we do the AL East and why I think that makes Boston arguably better than they were. But for right now, let's focus on some of the other moves made by this Dodgers team. They traded Kenta Maeda and a couple prospects for another pitching prospect. His name is Brusdar Graterol, I want to say it is. This move was actually supposed to be kind of part of the whole Boston thing. So it was supposed to be a 3-team trade between Boston, the Twins, Minnesota that is, and the Dodgers. So I guess Graterol was supposed to end up with Boston, but Boston looked at his medical and they weren't impressed or they weren't happy with it. So they decided we're going to back out of that part of the trade, but we still want to move on from David Price and Mookie Betts, and we still want Verdugo. So what ended up happening is the Dodgers just went back to the Twins on their own and said, we'll still give you Maeda for Graterol and prospects. And Graterol should be a good pitching prospect for this team. He's got a fastball velocity in the high 90s, touches 100 every now and again, and he's got some nasty stuff. And there are a couple other moves made. So one of the bigger losses from last season for the Dodgers is, pitcher Hyunjin Ryu decided to take his talents for a big money contract up to Toronto to play for the Blue Jays. He was an awesome pitcher for them last season. So for him, there isn't any return. For Kenta Maeda, at least there is a return. And one of the other moves, so there are some concurring moves in this. So Alex Wood steps back in. He comes back to the Dodgers after I think he spent a year with the Rangers. And he's immediately going to probably step into that 5-hole, into that 5th starting position. And then former Oakland A's reliever Blake Trinan, who had an incredible 2018 season. He was elite. He was arguably the best closer or reliever in all of baseball. It was on a 1-year deal. He's coming to Los Angeles to see if he can regain some of that form because he did not have a good season last year. I think he had an ERA touching 4, maybe 4.4. I think it was something like that. But either way, that's not a good year, especially when you're playing essentially at the top of your game, at the top of baseball, and then having a year like that right after. So that's kind of the major moves made by this Boston, or not this Boston, this LA team, excuse me, this Dodgers team. So this is kind of just the opening lineup. And of course, seeing as we're doing the NL, we're only going to be talking about 8 batters at a time and 5 pitchers, 6 pitchers, I should say, including the closer. So because they don't have the DH, we'll talk a little bit more about that whole split when we talk about the AL. So for right now, we're just going to be kind of running down these opening lineups. And I have to say, the Dodgers one is star-studded. It is incredible from top to bottom. According to this, they have the leadoff as Mookie Betts, who he's just an on-base machine. He's arguably been one of the MLB MVPs for the last couple seasons with the Red Sox. So they've got Mookie Betts leading off, him followed up by Max Muncy and Justin Turner, with Cody Bellinger batting cleanup, AJ Pollock behind him, Corey Seager in the 6th hole, Will Smith, their catcher, in the 7, and Gavin Lux, a second baseman, batting 8th. I would assume, as most people would, that the pitcher is going to bat 9th, either 8th or 9th, depending on how good at batting that pitcher is. Most of them usually not that great. But even this pitching staff that they have lined up, this top 5, you've got Walker Buehler, who was awesome last year, especially in the playoffs. He ended up being the Dodgers' ace last year in the playoffs. Clayton Kershaw, who he just has a long career of success, especially with the Dodgers. David Price, who he's got a high level of success, and it seemed like he revived his career a little bit there in Boston in the last year or two, since going to Boston from, I think it was from Tampa, actually. Julio Urias, a young pitcher there, and Alex Wood making his return to LA. And the closer for the Dodgers should be Kenley Jansen, who he's also had sustained consistent success for the Dodgers over the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 years. He's been their number one guy for the closing spot, and for good reason. And if I just look at this team, this is another year in a row that this Dodgers team really should be competing, not just for the NL West, but for the World Series. This is a team that has the quality and enough impact players to essentially, a lot of this team is just the NL All-Star squad. And some of these guys are coming over from the AL All-Star squad. This is a team that realistically should be winning World Series. They should have had more than one by now. I don't know if it's necessarily just the stereotype or the meme or the joke to talk about how bad Clayton Kershaw is in the playoffs at this point, but he hasn't been himself. He never is himself in the playoffs. And I understand that's the joke, but it seems like ever since he got shelled a couple years back by the Astros, or even just 2 years ago, he just hasn't been the same. Now, of course, we all know that poor performance from Kershaw was assisted a little bit by some outside and unseen forces, but nonetheless, he has got to shake that off. He has to do something to shake off whatever it is that he gets in him in the playoffs that forces him or causes him to not play as well, because without that number 2 guy or that number 3 pitcher, you're not going to win the World Series. And that's the thing. With the 2 teams that played in the World Series last year, both of those teams had great pitching, essentially from 1 to 4, 1 to 5. And if they needed a bullpen day, they had that bullpen. Do I think the Dodgers have a bullpen good enough to win the World Series? Yes, I do. This team, from top to bottom, should be winning championships by now. And if they don't win one this year, and they end up having to, for cap concerns, or they don't have a cap in baseball, but for luxury tax concerns, or for whatever reason, if they end up having to move on from Betts, Muncy, Turner, Bellinger, or Buehler, Kershaw, or Price, if they end up having to lose one of those major pieces of this team, at that point, I don't know if they'll be able to win the World Series with a team like that, because they've sacrificed a lot of their young talent and up-and-coming talent to put together essentially an all-star team. Like I said, this team is stacked, and realistically, with the addition of Mookie Betts and the addition of David Price, I see this team winning more games than they did last year. And with the fact that they already won 106 games last year, I mean, come on. That's kind of ridiculous. But moving on from excuse me, from the Dodgers, there are other teams in the NL West, as weird as that may sound. There are other teams that we need to talk about. So, next team down the line is the Arizona Diamondbacks. Last year, they had a winning record, which for a lot of people, that is a little bit surprising, but they've got a very quickly growing, surprisingly really good team as well. Last year, they went 85 and 77. They made a couple really nice pickups this offseason. So I'm going to start with those. The excuse me, the additions that this Diamondbacks team made. Of course, we got to start with the big one. They immediately, with immediate impact, get their number one starting pitcher. He hasn't been as good or as dominant as he has been in the past, last year or the year before last, but Madison Bumgarner finally makes his departure from San Francisco. It seems like the Cards have been saying that for the last, not the Cardinals, but it seems like his departure from San Fran has been in the cards for the last, 4 years. And he finally makes his move. He signs a 5-year, $85 million contract with the Diamondbacks and essentially immediately steps into their number one pitcher role. Now, with that said, he's not the only really strong pitcher they have. This Diamondbacks team boasts a pretty good starting five rotation. Now, there are a couple other moves that this team made. They traded for Starling Marte, a center fielder from Pittsburgh, giving up 2 prospects. And with him coming in to play center field, that allows breakout star Kettle Marte, of no relation, which I found out when I was doing this research. And that's just kind of weird to me. That's not necessarily a common last name, even a common, I think they are, let me see if I can find where they're from, where Starling Marte is from. He might be Puerto Rican. Excuse me, he's Dominican. That isn't a common last name, or at least I wouldn't think it is. But no relation. Either way, that allows Kettle to go back and start playing second base, a more natural position for him, instead of having him platooned out at center field. Plus, putting him at second base should help him play a little bit more effectively and a lot more safely. He had a back injury last year that cut his season short, even though it was a strong breakout year for him. And one of the only other major moves that this team has made is they're bringing in Cole Calhoun. He's coming home through free agency. He's immediately going to step into a starting role in their outfield. He is originally from Buckeye, Arizona. He went to Arizona State, and now he's finally back home and playing for the Arizona Diamondbacks. So, with all that in mind, I think now it's time to take a little bit more of a look at this team's opening day lineup. And as I said, this isn't coming from any of the teams. This is kind of just an idea or a prediction made by MLB.com. So, and I could definitely see most of these, if not all of these, working out just as they say. It looks like the Diamondbacks will be starting out, of course, leading off will be Kettle Marte, who he was just awesome last year at getting on base. That was kind of his MO. His OBP was really high, which that's his on base percentage. I would not be surprised if he is the leadoff batter for the Diamondbacks, followed up by, of no relation, Starling Marte, who, yes, he's very good at getting on base, but he also has a little bit more pop to his bat. They are followed up by Eduardo Escobar, the third baseman, David Peralta batting cleanup, first baseman Christian Walker coming in at the 5 seed, Cole Calhoun batting in 6, Nick Ahmed, the shortstop, coming in at 7, and at the 8-hole not number 8, but Carson Kelly, the catcher. So the thing with this lineup is it seems as though it would be extremely crucial for this team to essentially just play small ball. Not a lot of these guys boast big power bats. I could see Escobar and Peralta being their stronger or heavier bats, but even then, Peralta isn't necessarily known for the pop that he gets off with his swing. He is known a little bit more for his on base percentage and just how frequently he gets himself on base. And with that in mind, I think then it's important to focus on this team's pitching rotation and pitching staff. So if they're going to play small ball, I would assume they're also going to try and make sure that their defense, which their defense should be strong. Cole Calhoun, even Starling Marte and Peralta, all those guys in the outfield are plus defenders. They're very good at that. Uh, even looking as far as someone like Christian Walker and excuse me, and Marte, Kettle Marte, that is, at the infield, should be a very good defensive team where the offense might struggle a little bit. Now, pitching staff wise, like I said earlier, their new number one pitcher, Madison Bumgarner, he hasn't been at the same level that he has been before in the last year or two. We'll see if going to a new team kind of reignites him. And always for him coming into bat, that's kind of also one of the other things he's known for, not just his pitching, but his surprising ability to hit for a pitcher. And that might not be surprising for everybody, but for most pitchers to actually be kind of a threat at the plate is a little bit rare. You've also got Robbie Ray, who was their star pitcher last year, coming essentially just slotting back into the 2 seed. I could see those two, flip-flopping or maybe taking a start from one another if one is outplaying the other, having those two switch which day they pitch. That wouldn't really be much of an issue. They're followed up by Luke Weaver, Mike Leake, and Zach Gallen. And the closer for this team is looking like it'll be Archie Bradley. All those guys, I wouldn't say they're replacement. I'd say they're definitely average or slightly above average players, especially for pitchers coming in to fill out a pitching staff behind two definitely plus pitching guys. So with that in mind, I think that this team will be a little bit better than they were last year. I think their offense will be a little bit stronger, especially with picking up Starling Marte from the Pirates. I think they'll be good again defensively. I think they will be solid, and I think it'll be a good thing for them to get Kettle Marte back in the infield where he's more comfortable. Hopefully he'll get to actually play a full season and maybe get more games in, more at bats. But with everything in mind, I don't see much out of not the starting 5 of this team, but the bullpen. I don't know if they have a full bullpen that will really be able to sustain success with this team, but I do think they are better than last year, and I think they will certainly get more wins than they did last year. Moving along from the Diamondbacks, we go to the Giants. Now, the Giants have the San Francisco Giants. This team is a little bit frustrating. It's a team that has had a lot of talent over the last good couple of years. But right now, I don't see much when it comes to what they're doing to succeed now, because it seems to me like they just have a lot of veteran talent, not a lot of young guys. And once it seems like one of these guys just isn't playing, it kind of is a huge detriment to the team. Now, let me see if I can find. Yeah, here we go. Let's see. I think he's a little bit older. No, that's Carl. I'm looking for Mike. There he is. See, he's even 29. Now, I understand that 29 is not that old for a baseball player, but if I'm not mistaken, looking at it, he's probably the youngest guy or one of the youngest players in the Giants starting lineup, and that's their right fielder, Mike Yastrzemski, excuse me. Weird last name, but nonetheless, he is their starting right fielder. He's definitely got a lot of pop to his bat. He's very good defensively. He's a good player. He's a great player, low average, but he is leading off for them. And it looks like we've already started doing that. I'll have to get through get into some of the moves they've made. The moves that they've made have only really affected some of their backup guys and their starting rotation. So going through their their batting lineup first does not really make much of a difference. In the 2-hole is Brandon Belt, first baseman. This hurts me to say because I know he's been gone from the Rays for a while. If you guys don't know, I'm a huge Tampa Bay Rays fan. I love the Rays. And my favorite player, just from growing up and watching him, is Evan Longoria, the third baseman, formerly of the Rays. He was traded to San Fran a couple years back, and it's still weird to see him playing in that black and orange instead of uh, the blues and grays. But either way, Longoria batting third for the Giants, Alex Dickerson at cleanup, Buster Posey batting fifth, Brandon Crawford batting sixth at 7. You have Mauricio Dubon, and at 8th, Steven Duggar. Now, like I said, they did make a couple offseason moves, and two of them in free agency. There were two pretty big signings, but I don't think that they'll necessarily make a huge difference when it comes to the starting lineup and who's going to start. They ended up signing Wilmer Flores and Hunter Pence. Those were the two major free agent signings that they made. And the only other big move that they made is they made a trade with the Angels. They traded for Zach Cozart and Will Wilson for just pitcher Garrett Williams. So this move was more for the Angels to dump Zach Cozart's contract. He was signed to a big dollar 3-year deal just last offseason, or 2 seasons ago, excuse me. And he really has not lived up to expectations up until this point. Will Wilson was the number 15 pick overall in the 2019 draft, if I'm not mistaken. And it's essentially just a big cost to pay for the Angels to get rid of Cozart's contract and stay under the luxury tax. There's a reason for that, and we'll get into that when we talk about the AL West. That'll probably end up being next week. So on that same day, to essentially slide in the spot that Garrett Williams left, the Giants signed pitcher Kevin Gausman to a 1-year, $9 million deal. Not that really huge, but he does essentially become their number 3 pitcher in their rotation. So their rotation is Johnny Cueto, Jeff Samardzija, Kevin Gausman, Drew Smyly, and Tyler Beede in that order. Their closer, is looking to be Tony Watson. Now, my thing with this pitching staff is it seems like all these guys are pretty much out of their prime. Jeff Samardzija used to be a great pitcher. Just same with Johnny Cueto. None of these guys have been the same pitchers over the last couple of years as they have in the past. They're just outdated. They don't have as much left in them as they once did. Now, it will be interesting to see whether Gausman makes a huge impact on this. Same with Drew Smyly. I remember when he played for the Mariners and the Rays, he was solid for them. I'm not sure if he's, living up to how good he was when he left. But nonetheless, looking at this team, like I said, it seems as though this is a team that is essentially just made out of veterans. They don't have a lot of young talent. They don't have a lot of guys that will make a humongous difference when it comes to how good the team is. With that in mind, I don't think this team is very good. I'm looking at it, and yeah, I know they were 8 games under 500 last year. They went 77 and 85, and I think they're probably about at that same level. They haven't made many major moves. They haven't made a huge amount of adjustment, and for that reason, I think they kind of stick to that spot. Do I think they possibly can be 500 or even a little bit above? Sure, but I don't think that'll make much of a difference, especially with some of the moves the other teams in the division have made. Now, the next worst team, or I should say the 4th ranked team from last season, is the Rockies. Now, I said other teams in this division made moves. The Rockies are not one of them. The Rockies have essentially stayed put. They might have made some spring training adjustments or some spring training invites, optioned some players, assigned other players. But when it comes to players that will actively make this starting roster, they have not made many moves, if any. According to what I looked at with MLB.com, looking at some of the major moves through the offseason and the winter, really haven't. I have seen no major moves for the Colorado Rockies. With that in mind, I think it's interesting that the team was not that good last year, and they were. I know why. It has to be based on their pitching staff, because if I look through their roster, if I look through their starting lineup, it's solid. They've got a lot of talent, a lot of power, and if you think about it even more so, the fact that they play in Mile High so often, or they play in Denver, Mile High is where the Broncos play. But either way, they play at Coors. That's the name of it, in Colorado, where it's proven the ball just travels further. The Coors effect is a real thing. And they've got a lot of pop on this lineup. So with the fact that they didn't make any moves, I guess that means just kind of jump right into it. Leading off for them would be Charlie Blackmon, their center fielder, known for his long hair and humongous beard, followed up by Trevor Story, the shortstop, and David Dahl from right field. And batting cleanup, maybe not for long, nor their third baseman, Nolan Arenado, who, if you ask me, he's arguably one of the best third basemen in baseball right now. He's exceptional defensively, and he's got a great bat. Their first baseman batting fifth is Daniel Murphy, Ryan McMahon at second and batting sixth, Ian Desmond in left field batting seventh, and their catcher, Tony Walters, batting eighth. Now, I know I just mentioned that Arenado might not be playing very much longer for the Rockies. And that's because, if I'm not mistaken, early in the offseason, there might have been or must have been a disagreement between himself and some of the Rockies management, and he decided to ask for a trade. He requested a trade away from the Rockies. They have not fulfilled that, I don't know if it's necessarily an obligation, but they have not, fulfilled that request at this point. As far as I've heard, just they aren't satisfied with what they would be getting for Arenado, and I completely understand that. He is, like I said, one of the premier third basemen in baseball right now, and that's a position of need for a lot of teams. The third base spot is extremely important, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and to get a third baseman that is perennially a gold glove or platinum glove nominee or winner with as good a bat as he has, you're going to want, you're going to want the lion's share. You're going to want a king's ransom for someone like Arenado. And if the Rockies haven't gotten that yet from another team, I completely understand why they have not, pulled the trigger on a deal. Now, looking at this pitching staff, it's really interesting to me that this pitching staff does not perform, because they have two or three quality starters in my eyes. They're starting, their first three starters are John Gray, Herman Marquez, and Kyle Freeland. All those three guys are quality starters in my eyes, and it's just interesting that they have not performed over the last couple of years, especially last year. Now they're matched up they're followed up by Antonio Senzatella, and either Jeff Hoffman or Chichi Gonzalez. Now those two guys, or three, I think might even belong in a bullpen. I don't think that those guys are starting quality. They definitely don't get this team the distance. They don't get them the amount that they need, because, again, the Rockies, it's their pitching staff that's been letting them down. They've been scoring runs because that's what you can do at their home field, is just put up a ton of runs. Now, like I said, it's been their pitching staff. I like John Gray. I don't understand why he has not been performing. The only thing that I can think of, either a drop in velocity or there's something going on with just how he's pitching. Could be anything from his motion to the spin rate he's getting. Who knows? He has not been very good over the last couple of years. Herman Marquez, I think, has been the better pitcher than of the two of them. Kyle Freeland's also been solid. And then the other two, I think, essentially are bullpen guys. I think they maybe get you 4 or 5 innings. They realistically, in the NL, you would rather your pitchers get more, just because they get more. You'd want them to go out there and spend as much time on the mound, especially with pitchers batting. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going through the lineup as frequently. And the closer for this team is Wade Davis. If the Rockies end up moving on from Arenado, which I think is something that is inevitable, I think it's something that's going to happen for this team to get to any level of success, because he obviously is not happy playing there, and usually happy players do not do not perform, do not play well. Now, if they decide or on a package to move on Arenado with, I think it should be centered around a pitcher, because you have plenty of other talent in this lineup that can bolster your lineup that can keep it going and keep it performing at a high enough level where if you get a star pitcher for someone like Arenado or a pitching prospect that you are 100% this guy will be good with. If that's what you can get for Arenado, I think that's the only thing they can make a move with him for. Now, if they decide to instead go for more offense, I think that would be a mistake. I think that would essentially make the move lateral. They wouldn't be getting any better. And that's really hard to do if you're moving on from someone like Arenado. And with that in mind, I don't think the Rockies have gotten better. I think, again, they haven't made any major moves. I think they're almost exactly the same. The only thing I can say, though, is you have to expect this pitching staff to eventually get better. You have to hope that they get better for this team to have any level of success next year, especially with the last team in this division, the San Diego Padres, making a couple big moves. They've made some great moves, and I've been very impressed with what they've been able to do. And again, this is one of those teams where the Padres, we're going to move on from the Rockies and go to the Padres. Padres have made a lot of moves. Now, this is another team where the pitching staff has been letting them down. Their starting pitching staff, I should say, because they have some incredible relievers. I'm just going to hop right into it and just say their closer, Kirby Yates, last year was probably the best reliever or the best closer in baseball. And then one of the big moves that they've made this offseason is they traded Manuel Margot and a prospect for Emilio Pagan from the Tampa Bay Rays. And Pagan is an awesome reliever. I mean, from just watching him myself and the metrics, last year, based on the metrics, he was the most efficient pitcher in baseball. Not just the most efficient reliever, the most efficient pitcher in all of baseball. Now, the more interesting thing is based on that same metric, the second most efficient reliever in baseball last year was Kirby Yates, the current San Diego Padres closer. So, I mean, that just gives you a great 1-2 punch late in games. I mean, that's essentially just saying, okay, no matter what, we're going to have 2 scoreless frames or 2 very low scoring frames. And that's just an incredible addition to the Padres bullpen. But now with losing both Margot and trading outfielder Hunter Renfroe, actually Hunter Renfroe as well as Margot both went to the Tampa Bay Rays. We'll get into the Renfroe trade in just a second. That could leave a big hole in that outfield, though. I mean, you're losing essentially 2 starting outfielders or 1 starting outfielder if the Padres felt as though Margot was not in Renfroe, but you're essentially losing 2 outfielders and bringing in 1 outfielder and a pitcher. That could be an area now of concern when it comes to the defense you're getting from your outfield. So, like I said, just moving on from that, then the Padres traded outfielder Hunter Renfroe and second base project Xavier Edwards for outfielder Tommy Pham and infielder / pitching prospect Jake Cronenworth. I think at the MLB level, just based on what I've seen from any video I've seen of him and just his statistics, I think he'll probably just end up being a bat. He'll be an infielder, not necessarily a two-way player, a pitcher and a batter. But the thing is, those are not the only moves that this team's made. They also traded for second baseman Jurickson Profar from the Oakland A's for catcher, Austin Allen, and a player to be named. Drew Pomeranz signed with the Padres as well, coming in to bolster that bullpen. And the Padres traded Luis Urias, Eric Lauer, and a player to be named for Trent Grisham and Zach Davies. Both those guys will immediately step in and help out with this team. So with that, I think it's time to kind of look at this whole roster kind of in its whole. Batting first for this team would be Fernando Tatis Jr. Their shortstop, he was awesome. He's probably one of the best young players in baseball right now. I love Tatis Jr. He's great. Batting second would probably be Tommy Pham, the left fielder. Batting third would be Eric Hosmer from first base. Batting cleanup would be Manny Machado from third base. Batting fifth would be Will Myers from right field, followed up by Trent Grisham from center, Jurickson Profar at second, and Francisco Mejia from catcher. Now, that's a pretty if you look at that thing just all in all, that's a pretty scary lineup. Tatis gets on base more often than not. Tommy Pham is also a walk machine. He's got a great eye. He also gets on base like crazy. Hosmer, I think, might be or just is in the downswing of his career. He isn't as good as he used to be, but he still has a great bat. Manny Machado is still one of the premier players in baseball. He might not be as good as he was when he was playing for Baltimore, but I do still think he is a great addition to any team. Will Myers has a ton of power behind him. It's just one of those things where I don't know if he's ever really been able to or going to be able to put all of his tools together, even though he has a ton of them. I think Jurickson Profar batting seventh. I mean, having a guy like him batting seventh, he might not have been superbly successful with Oakland, but I do think he's an extremely talented batter, but even more so a fielder. Then you've got Grisham and Mejia, who those two are just guys that would definitely fill a hole well in the lineup. Now to the pitchers, and this is kind of where this team lets you down a little bit. Their 5 rotation is Chris Paddock, Dinelson Lamet, Garrett Richards, Zach Davies, and Joey Lucchesi. Joey Lucchesi. Now, like I said, this is kind of where the Padres let you down a little bit. Their starting rotation isn't very good, and it just hasn't made any improvements. This team looks like they're still waiting for some of their young pitchers to make the transition, make it up to the MLB level. And pitching is weird. Pitching is one of those things that you're not going to hit more. You're going to look like not hit more often than not when it comes to scouting and prospect building. It's just one of those things that's weird. There's no exact science to pitching. And with that in mind, though, the Padres have a really good bullpen now. I mean, some would argue they might have one of the best bullpens in baseball. I mean, their bullpen essentially is led off by Drew Pomeranz, and then at the end of games, like I said earlier, you've got Emilio Pagan and Kirby Yates. If those two at the end, Yates and Pagan, can play anything like they did last year, that's essentially a 1-2 punch of, well, looks like we're not, for one team, looks like we're not scoring in the bottom 2 frames of any game. Because those are guys that can pitch day in and day out. And the thing is, Pagan can pitch more than 1 inning. So realistically, you could even say, oh, look, if Pagan's coming in the 7th or the 6th, looks like, there's 3, 2, 3, 4 innings of scoreless baseball from one team. With that in mind, though, I'm a big fan of saying that the pitching staff is what really wins you games. And the starting pitching staff of the Padres really does not inspire confidence in me. I think they got better than they were last year? Oh, 100%. I think they'll certainly win a lot more than 70 games, and I don't think they'll be the bottom seed team in this division next season. With all that in mind, going through everything that I have, it's time to do what I've been doing with football the last couple weeks and take a look at, excuse me, how I think the NL West is going to shake out next year. Now, the Dodgers, like I said, the Dodgers have just gotten better. So no matter what, Dodgers number 1, they're staying at the top. I think, again, they're going to challenge for the World Series, not just the NL West. I think that team is just incredible top to bottom. We'll have to see if injuries or anything like that take a toll, but either way, they have a ton of depth as well. I certainly think the Diamondbacks get better. I think they're possibly even in the chase for a wild card spot in the NL next year, even though that is incredibly difficult because there are a lot of good teams in the National League. There are a lot of good teams in the National League. And I mean, look, even the Nationals, the Washington Nationals won the darn World Series last year from the wild card. So I think the Diamondbacks get better and they end up challenging for a wild card spot. I think the Giants stay at about the same. They might be a little bit better, get a little bit closer to that 500 mark, but it's an aging team. And while they might be okay or good next year, if they don't work to fill out some of these spots with younger guys, I don't think that they're going to have a lot of sustained success over the next couple years. The Rockies, I think they stay exactly the same. They haven't made any moves, nothing notable. And until they move on from Arenado, that's a humongous question mark that team's going to have to deal with. But here's where I put my kind of hot take for the NL West, and that's the Padres. I think the Padres have gotten so much better. I think they come in third in the division. I think they overtake the Rockies, they overtake the Giants. I don't think they're as good as the Diamondbacks, but I certainly think that this San Diego Padres team, as currently constituted, is a very solid team. Now, do I think their pitching could use some work? Yeah, of course. But thing is, not all those guys are in their prime, or not all those guys are past their prime. These are guys that can still grow. So this is kind of how I see the NL West shaking out next year. I've got the Dodgers at 1, the Diamondbacks at 2, the Padres in 3, Giants at 4, Rockies at 5. That might be a hot take for the Padres, especially with how not so great their pitching staff is, but nonetheless, that is where I have them. Thank you all for tuning into what has been a lot of fun for me, because as much as I love football, I think just with how long the season is and just how intricate the game is, I just love baseball. Baseball is one of my favorite sports, and it's one of my favorite sports to talk about. But again, thank you guys all for coming out and tuning in. That is all I have for you all today. Hope you guys are all staying safe, staying inside, making sure to, wash your hands, use your hand sanitizer. At this point, shoot, if you're going out, wear a mask. Any little thing to help, flatten the curve, as they always are, as everybody's been saying. Thank you all for watching. I've been George Ruggiero. This has been Just G Live on the NL West, and I will see you guys on Wednesday.